Look, I know we did the last episode without a sketch, but we've got a genuine professional actor this time, and a stand-up comedian. And everybody loves a sketch, really.
Do they?
An actor and a stand-up comedian. You've really blown the budget this time, Richard.
Well, not so much. As a card-carrying Yorkshireman, I hired Toby Hadoke because he's both an actor and a comedian.
And famously the nicest man in fandom.
What? Even nicer than me?
I'm not entirely sure about that. He's got some unusual riders in his contract.
Oh, hello, Richard. I hope you got hold of the blue opal fruits that I specified.
Well, about that, Toby.
Yeah, it's Mr. Hadoke to you.
Well, look, they've been starbursts for over 20 years.
Yeah, never been nearly as good since.
And I couldn't find any blue ones anywhere.
Well, you didn't try hard enough. Anyway, my agent tells me that in addition to the story discussion, you've engaged me for a comic sketch.
It's a bit of a tradition. Richard writes them.
Yes, and we have to pretend to find them amusing.
What's that?
I said they're all jolly amusing.
Yeah, well, it better be. I've got my reputation to think about.
You're playing the role of Guy Crayford, Toby. I've got you an eye patch.
Whatever for.
Well, I know how you professionals like a bit of method acting. Plus, the listeners will love it.
An eye patch. On audio.
Trust me, it'll be brilliant.
Oh, for goodness sake. Give it here. What's my cue?
He did nothing for you, Crayford. Absolutely nothing at all, except brainwash you.
That's not true! Try to keep it together, Paul.
You were hijacked by the Kralls, Crayford.
Nothing went wrong with your rocket, Crayford. You weren't even injured. Take off the eye patch and look for yourself.
What's supposed to be so funny? And why are you all wearing eye patches?
It's a homage.
To that anecdote about Inferno.
It's funny because we're all wearing eye patches. I mean, one eye patch is funny, right? But I mean, multiple eye patches, they just get funnier. The more eye patches you throw into an anecdote, the funnier it gets. I mean, I'm not alone there, am I?
Yeah, I'll say it again. On audio, look, trust me, I'm a comedian. I've had funnier hospitalisations. Anyway, that's a terrible anecdote. Wasn't funny then, and it isn't funny now.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, that probably could have gone better.
There's only one thing to do now. Hit the theme tune. Welcome to the podcast where we take something old, a Doctor Who story from the original series, compare it with something new, one from the new series, and add something borrowed, that sketch, to make Something Who. First we'll look at 4th Doctor story The Android Invasion from Season 13. We have a great lineup, headlined by our special guest, actor, stand-up comedian, writer, presenter and podcaster, Toby Hadoke.
Hello, how are you?
Hi Toby, and welcome back to Something Who, but of course this is your first regular episode.
Yes, well, thanks for having me. I've been trying to get fit, so I've been listening to you fellows on many a jog, and it's distracted me from the pain.
Well, we've got to the end, so I suppose we have to go back to Crayford again, don't we? And talk about the eye patch in the room.
It is one of the silliest moments in the entire history of Doctor Who, and there's some stiff competition. But the idea that he's never washed his face, or just take it, the listeners were not privy to the hilarity with which this podcast began. As I started the Zoom call, or whatever it is we're doing. I was late because it's not a Zoom call, it's something else that I don't understand. But anyway, I had an eye patch on, and if you've got an eye, it's actually quite discombobulating and very uncomfortable. And I had to take it off fairly quickly because it's not an enjoyable... And also, you can tell you've got an eye. I'm sorry. If I wear a glove, it doesn't mean I've forgotten I've got hands. It's ridiculous on every... And also, it's not even... It's not that it's silly that he doesn't know he's got an eye under his eye patch. It's the whole convincing him that they've saved him by putting him back together because he's been and losing his eye. Couldn't they have just mocked up a photograph of them pulling him out of a hedge or something. Anything. It seems to me like a lot of the Kral's plans. Yeah. It seems unnecessarily convoluted, and its flaws manifest to anybody that thinks about them for about a second. Yeah. But I think Nation. I mean, there's a serious conversation to be had if you want to. My partner is somebody who campaigns to have more sort of disability representation on our screens, and you could say Terry Nation has a wheelchair user in Dalek Invasion of Earth. Yeah. Guy, he likes eye patches. He kind of likes that stuff and Germanic names as well. He likes stuff that's sort of cool from sort of war films and stuff. Be it, somebody that's got an injury or something like that. And it's all kind of window dressing to make, and it is the sort of stuff that as a kid you would sort of go, oh yeah, he's got an eye patch, or he's got a scar, or he's a wheelchair user, which made it sort of seem somehow more grown-uppy and boys-only. It's sort of it's the kind of furniture of the adventure story that is interesting to look at now through a modern lens. I don't get offended by it or anything. I get more offended by the fact that it's just really stupid. But I think it's there is an interesting grown-up conversation to be had about it if one wanted to.
It's annoying that it's so thoroughly botched, because the basic idea that the Kralls would do something so unethical just to win him over psychologically to their point of view is a nice idea. And if it had been done well, and there are 1,000 ways of doing it properly, then it could have been a really powerful moment.
But the thing is, I mean, everyone at the Space Centre, though, is cut from the same cloth as Crayford, because he reappears 2 years after they lost him, and they're delighted to see him. They don't notice he's got an eye patch. They don't comment on it. They don't say...
Well, no, they might have had training for that,
okay.
To not be shocked.
Yeah.
They've had somebody come in and give them a talk about how not to
sensitivity training.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Don't display your ableist bias if you are reunited with a long lost crew member and he's got a bit missing.
Splendid. About 3 decades too early. But the other thing that is, I mean, did he have food and water for 2 years? I mean, did they give him all that stuff just in case you get lost for a couple of years? We've got plenty of air, we've got plenty of food, we've got plenty of water. Don't worry about it, guy. You'll be fine. Because basically, as far as Sarah says in episode 1, well, he disappeared and they've given him up for lost. So and then he comes back and it's like, oh yeah, hi guy, great to see you again.
And petrol for his rocket.
Indeed.
If this had been Malcolm Hulke, it'd have gone through some sort of psychological torture, proper brainwashing to convince him of all of that. They would have actually had him in a cell for 2 years, convincing him that he was surviving on licking the condensation off the walls.
Yeah, and he'd have also had
ambassadors of death stuff.
He'd have also had some really good scenes that were only in the Target novel.
and a middle name.
He
used to do. Well, there we go.
Yeah.
But we haven't actually talked about what we think of the Kralls.
Yeah.
I think that's quite telling.
Oh, I quite like them. Yeah, I like the fact that they don't just... there's a lot of men in green suits with masks in Doctor Who, but at least they've sort of gone for some kind of the sort of gnarled, hunchbacky thing. They've thought about their body shape as well as the different face, which I quite like. Because we've all seen loads of series where people have got bumpy faces, but that's about it. So I like the fact that they've got that sort of element to them. I mean, it's not Roy Skelton's fault. Zippy became famous, and the Marshal Chadaki is reminiscent of that. And I like Stigron's death scene, where he does a little bit of a backflip and then lands in the in the plague that clearly doesn't spread very far because it kills him and then runs out.
Yeah,
so
thank goodness for that.
They were going to have to. Everyone was have to get very, very close to each other to pass that one on. But it's still, the green.
Never mind 6 feet.
It's a nice little for your climax. It's a nice sort of stunt and bit of goo just to give it a bit of seeing as everything else takes place off screen.
Is everyone here? Giles, Gav, Ellie.
Where's Paul?
Oh, I don't know.
Maybe we should go and look for him.
No, Paul told us to wait for him here.
All right. Take it away, Ellie.
Okay, well, as you can see, we're smack in the middle of Something Who Bunker, about to record a podcast.
I can understand that part of it all right, but can't you explain the wider issues, Ellie?
Yes, alright. Gav, would you mind drawing the curtains?
Sure.
All ready? Slide 1. Tell me, who's that?
Radio Free Scarrow, isn't it?
Top of the class, Giles, top of the class. Here's another.
Oh, 42 to Doomsday.
Thank you very much, Richard. And our old friend?
The Missing Episodes podcast. Actually, where is Paul?
Perhaps we should check on him.
No, Paul told us we should stay here. Look, Ellie, are you going to show us podcast cover art all night?
Tell me what they have in common and I might stop.
Well, they're all Doctor Who podcasts?
Almost right, Giles. They're Doctor Who podcasts that people have actually heard of.
Yes.
Unlike this one. Look, I agreed to join you for this episode, but what's the point if no one's listening? Richard, more promotional effort. Gav, funnier anecdotes. Giles, better science. Let's make this an episode to remember. Where's Paul got to?
Oh, it's too late. Let's get cracking. We have, as our special guest, cosplayer and Who fan about town, Ellie, also known as Tardis Monkey.
Hello.
Yeah, go on, Ellie. Where did you come across the demons?
It was actually one of the very first episodes I remember watching when I was a kid, and my granddad had recorded it off of UK Gold, and I remember it being in black and white as well, so it was funny, sort of. I didn't watch it in colour until the DVD came out, so I just remember it always in black and white, which I think gives it more atmospheric look to it anyway. But yeah, that was like my original place that I saw it, so good old VHS tape, kind of thing.
The Doctor springs into action at the start of the story, like he knows what's going on.
He does.
Yes.
And there's no kind of backstory to that. He rushes off to the dig as if he knows the world's going to end if that mound's opened up. But do we assume that he's aware of the demons being on Earth 100,000 years ago?
Well, he seems to be aware of the demons.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, because he knows who they are, because he's, that line where he's like, the demons from the planet Deimos kind of thing.
Yeah,
so...
and then Jo chips in, presumably as she's been fully briefed in a scene that we're not privy to, because she knows how many light years away Deimos is. She just goes, yes, Deimos is 60,000 light years away.
Yeah.
I guess that was a whole off-screen explanation.
Okay.
Must have been. Yeah, I mean, the Doctor has been to 100,000 BC.
True. Okay.
So maybe he came, I mean, obviously it was off screen. We didn't see it during An Unearthly Child or whatever we're calling that. But maybe he went back to 100,000 BC just to see how they were getting on and tripped over Azal at that point.
And his wrinkled stockings.
Yeah.
Yeah, bless
There
him.
are a few moments where it slides into...
One of those...
Speaking of Azal's scale, something I noticed today that I'd always thought was a continuity issue or a production error before. The hoof prints seen from the helicopter are enormous.
That always annoys me, that bit, yeah.
And then when they go on the ground, they're much smaller. But apparently that's intentional. The idea was that Azal was shrinking as he walked and gets smaller and smaller and smaller as he finally gets to the crypt, which is how he's big enough to get through the door of the crypt. Because apparently there was a production shot intended that would have shown the footprints from the air decreasing in size. But you don't get that. You just get big ones from the air and then smaller ones on the ground. So it just looks like an awful error, but apparently not.
And in fact, even the heat shield thing in the Brigadier with his swagger stick or whatever it is, isn't a bad bit of, considering the budget of Doctor Who, it seems to work pretty well.
Yeah.
And chucking the rocks and the sticks and them exploding, that's all very neatly done.
It's really cool visual effects. I thought it was really effective. Even now, I still don't know how they did it. It's like really cool.
I can tell you, it's very boring.
Okay, Gav, you can be the boring one. Okay.
They had a spring-loaded charge inside the prop with a nylon thread attached to a little piece that kept two electric contacts apart. So when they threw the prop that contained the explosive, the nylon string attached to the prop pulled tight, basically pulled the pin out as if it was a grenade,
Yeah.
which allowed the detonator inside to make contact, and it set the explosive off in the prop midair. Which is why if you watch Nick Courtney picking that stick up incredibly gingerly, because he knows it could well go off in his hand.
Okay.
But I always thought that was just careful camera placement, and he threw the stick off screen at the moment it was detonated.
Somebody just throws a smoke bomb kind of thing.
yeah.
Like, yeah.
Apparently it's all
Clever.
practically done.
Clever stuff, ingenious.
Very, very groovy civvies that Benton and Yates are wearing. Finally out of uniform for
Oh,
the first
very
time.
much so.
Oh no, it's weird seeing them in civilian clothes. I go, oh no, I don't know if I like this.
Yeah, that was Barry Letts wanting to show sort of the private lives of the unit team,
Yeah.
which is why we get the brigadier in bed, and there was a
Yeah.
potential to have his wife in shot. She was going to be Fiona Lethbridge Stewart handing him the phone, but that was vetoed. We worked hard. I was part of the team, or I headed the team that did some of the cleanup for the Blu-ray,
Yeah.
and the Benton's trousers were the most problematic thing of the entire, because that, particularly when they land on the lawn, they get out of the helicopter, and the red of his trousers bled into the green of the grass for about 2 feet to the right.
Wow.
So we had Kieran Hyman, Rich Tipple, and Anthony Lamb, and I forget which of them worked on Benton's trousers. Poor chap. But yeah, the civvies, the colour of those
It's an
civvies
unforgiving task.
caused a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
But yeah,
It looks
which brings
fantastic,
me
though. Has to be
to Benton and Yates apparently watching a live rugby match
Yeah.
at
Almost
midnight.
midnight.
At midnight.
Where's that happening?
Unless it's recorded, in which case one of them has been quite savvy in getting the other one to bet on the outcome.
Yeah. Well, they didn't have the internet in those days, mind you. They did have
No,
newspapers.
they did have
though.
newspapers. It wasn't the Bronze Age.
Yeah, that's true.
More to the point, if they had a video recorder, weren't they recording Space Pirates a few months earlier?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Oh.
Sorry, science nerd thing. They dress up all this. I'm not as hung up on my Doctor Who having to be sciencey as Gav is, but it does slightly wrinkle with me, or rankle rather, when they shoot for something and then they miss it. They try and make something sound very sciencey, and you think, oh, that's clever, that's a really good idea, and then they botch it. And the whole thing with E equals MC squared, and that explaining the releases and exchanges of heat and so on, and yet they've just set up in the second episode that the spaceship, despite having shrunk in size, weighs exactly as much as it did. So it's still got the same. It's still got the same mass.
Right.
So there's
Yeah.
no.
Pick it up because it's 750 tons.
Yes.
Good point.
So, so it's slightly. I thought, hang on.
Also, if they were losing that amount of mass, has anyone worked out C squared is a hell of a lot of E, isn't it?
True. It's,
Probably
Where is it?
blow up the Earth. Sorry, go on.
Where is it coming from? Which bits of Azal is he losing? Is it every other atom, or does he have 5 legs when he's full size?
It's the same thing as with the giant robot. It just everything gets bigger, everything gets smaller.
But then you're not losing mass
Yeah.
because you could shrink the gaps between the atoms, couldn't you?
Well,
But then you would have no energy release.
yeah. Well.
so Ellie, Gav was saying that you were involved in some filming in Aldbourne, was it?
Yes, for the Blu-ray box set, The Devil's Weekend.
And I mean, it still looked surprisingly similar, as I recall from watching that extra.
It's like going in a time machine. I mean, it's like walking onto a set. Like, the whole village just hasn't changed in the slightest. All the buildings are the same. I mean, even the people, the villagers that were sort of tiny dots that you see on the old films and stuff, like the behind the scenes. They're now adults, and they got kids and everything. They're sort of like a real sort of like close knit community kind of thing. But it's really lovely to go and visit because everything's the same. So you're like, oh, I remember that's the bit where he says 5 rounds rapid, and then like 30 minutes up from the village is where Devil's Mounds are and stuff like that. So you can go and visit that. It's not a bad walk, actually. And yeah, it's just sort of like eerily calm up there as well. Because I remember when we were filming, we were chasing the rain. Like, the rain always kept going opposite to us, which was just like really, really fortunate. But I just remember sort of like we were looking over and we could see the rain coming down, and a rainbow just appeared, and I just remember like me and Katie and everybody just looking over each other like, that's John over there, that's John Pertwee looking at us at the moment. And it was just like a really, really lovely time, super busy, sort of just trying to get everything filmed and stuff. But there's so many good stories from like the villagers and that they still got pictures, they've still got autographs of them at the time. Like there was one person who had Roger Delgado's signature and stuff, and he was showing me photos. So yeah, it was just a nice little community that I think are really appreciative of Doctor Who. It just never has left them. And I mean, they even got like Dalek bins and TARDIS bins and stuff like that, and the cloven hoof sign still sort of outside the pub, and you can go and have a meal and whatever. So yeah, it was wonderful, like really sort of good experience. And it's funny because this was the first time I'd ever been up there, and I only live sort of like half an hour, 40 minutes away, and it was a good enough excuse to sort of like have Katie Manning take you in your arms, showing you around and stuff, which was just so lovely. I mean, I just adore her so much. Yeah, it was wonderful. It was lovely.
Well,
was it a single day?
2 days.
2 days.
Yeah.
You
So
stayed there?
no, I didn't, because I lived just sort of down the road. I was the runner, so I did all the supply runs. I got all the snacks and the drinks and all that kind of stuff ready for them, because it was cold. It was absolutely freezing. And I mean, climbing the church tower, because of COVID and everything, we had to be sort of really careful on how many people did certain things, and we all had to keep our distance. So you probably see it in the documentary, like we're all spaced apart and stuff. But everything felt safe. And yeah, and the drone shots of like Oldbourne sort of around the church and everything was just stunning. It's a shame that they never actually filmed in the church itself for the episode, because it's like stunning inside. But I think it was something to do with the vicar just didn't want them in there at the time.
Right.
But I think the vicar now, like lovely lady, was just like, yeah, if they ever came back, they'd come straight in kind of thing. Yeah, if anybody gets a chance, I would like highly recommend it, because it is just walking onto a Doctor Who set.
And finally, a newcomer to Something Who, but very well known, I'm sure, to our listeners, graphic designer and illustrator Anthony Lamb.
Hello, good to see you.
Attack of the Cybermen from...
Bands are over, definitely.
Yeah, by Paula Moore, the famous writer.
And
She's in my top 10 favourite classic female Doctor Who writers.
Very good. And directed by Matthew Robinson. So yeah, I mean, I suppose to set the scene, it's January 1985. I'm about to start the second term at sixth form. I'm a fully paid-up DWAS member. I'm looking forward to a story that's revisiting what we all know is the greatest Doctor Who story ever made, Tomb of the Cybermen, even though no one in the UK has seen it since 1967, which means I haven't seen it at all. And also, because it's the era of VHS, at least in our household, it's a story I've watched many times, but probably not in the last 30 years. So I guess that's how I came across Attack of the Cybermen. What about the rest of you?
I got this in that brief period of time when I had access to a special man, and if I whispered magic words or sent him a check in the post, I would get bootleg Doctor Who VHSs.
Right.
So that's how I first saw Attack of the Cybermen, relatively recently in the grand scheme of things, about 96, 97.
Yeah.
So you're jumping over the VHS release. It came in a tin with, I think, the 10th Planet.
Oh, yeah. I remember the
good
planet
Lord.
in a tin
Takes me back.
or something.
That's how I first saw it. I was 4 years old or something when it was transmitted. not yet able to use the television or indeed know what was going on. So I didn't see it until the VHS box set. Yeah, and I thought it was somewhat acceptable.
It was 2000 for the VHS and 2009 for the DVD. Yeah, this would have been one I probably also, I think I joined the DWAS in between 84 and 85. So I gave my Celestial Toy Rooms through the post. I can't remember whether... did we know that this was going to be... Was this hyped as being a sequel to Tomb?
Yeah, well, I think so.
I can't really... I guess it probably would have been.
Certainly that's in my head anyway, that it was... It might have been even mentioned in Doctor Who Monthly or something like that.
Yeah, this was pre-VHS for me, so it was probably something I listened to for ages on my home tape C90 cassettes before it got chewed up inevitably by the tape recorder gods.
Always a sad day when that happens.
It's just as well we weren't relying on those audio recordings, Giles.
Yeah, frankly, it would have been. Yes, yeah, it would have been the Graham Strong of my day.
Yeah,
with a hexagonal pencil. You know, always had to have you had to have one with a hexagonal barrel in order to engage with the cogs on the old cassette.
Yeah.
Also, your little finger is also quite useful.
Oh yes, yeah.
I've got a really bizarrely strong memory of just ratcheting the little cog in there.
Yeah, muscle memory is doing it now. It's like I can feel it.
We have a great lineup, headed up by our special guest, former DWM editor Gary Gillatt.
Thank you for having me.
We're going to talk about Delta and the Bannermen.
I'm fascinated by their date in the countryside. But before we get to that, I think we need to tackle the matter of the baby that they take. That's a bold choice. It really all falls down.
Oh my God.
And someone, and also, but it's all been thought about so well as well because they planned that baby grow because it has the same hexagonal bee pattern that the grown-up costumes have. So someone was given that job in a few weeks to sort of knit that. And so they went in fully planning to do it that way. But you can't... It's one of those kind of elephant in the room kind of decisions, you know, that you can't ever square. You can't ever let anyone see it who might know you, for fear they'll hold it against you. They'll hold it against you personally. You know, it's really like, don't come in now, Mum. Moment, that baby.
It strikes me that could have been very sinister. I've only just remembered Royal Jelly, the Tales of the Unexpected episode.
Oh yes.
So in the original, I was going to say the dark version of this. The version where this was as serious as Dragonfire. That could have been very worrying. It's just worrying in a different way, isn't it? What we actually get.
The story's desperately trying to be fun and funny. I don't mean to put a damper on it, but I generally don't find it either. But a jump cut to a green baby is one of the funniest things I have ever seen, and I'd completely forgotten it was coming, and it absolutely killed me. And I missed about 5 minutes of this. I had to rewind it because it made me laugh so much. I had a coughing fit, and I had to rewind it and rewatch. Oh, it's wonderful, wonderful stuff.
Yeah.
I want to rewatch it right now.
And Billy's feelings for Delta only deepen at this point. Obviously, he's fancied her across the dance floor, as many a man has. And often they find out that they have a child, and maybe that changes his view about if he's going to make his move. He doesn't come in and see this particular child, but really at that moment, that's when the real love's arrow hits him somehow. And then they go on that weird date in the countryside, and he is just too into it. She's saying stuff like, if I can get the hatchling to the brood planet, I can take the case to judgment, which is quite a line. There's a lot going on there, from hatchling to a tribunal of some kind, just in one line. And he's just, well, anything I can do, just tell me, Delta. Like, she's asked him to get the car seat ready for a trip to Quicksave. And then later, she shows him the compound, which is in blister packs, so it's obviously like it's available on prescription on Shimmeron, and she's got the last few. And he sort of eyes it up, and it's just slightly badly edited. It stays on him a bit too long, so he looks really weird as he looks down at it, and then takes it and puts it in his jacket or something, doesn't he? And then later she says, it's my favourite, it's the bathos of it. You haven't been eating that, have you? He goes, I had to, Delta. You haven't been eating that. I had to.
I want him to start buzzing like Timothy West in Tell the Unexpected.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It is all quite sinister. I'm not sure quite what's. Yeah, you can definitely put a very sinister spin on what's going on with.
Try.
Yeah.
Chris Clough keeps it light though.
Yes.
That's the last of me magnetic disk space gone. Rubbishy newfangled editing programs. Hang on, me microphone's on the blink. Ah, that's better.
This is Missing Episodes podcast calling Something Who. Something Who, can you hear me?
Something who here? I can hear you, Missing Episodes. Go away.
What? Now listen. This is Tim Burrows, commander of the TV Reviews podcast division. Give me your Apple Podcasts identity registration.
Oh, come on, Commander. I lost that thing about 30 years ago. Why don't you go about your business and leave me alone?
Here's his DWAS registration, Tim. He's a real old-timer. He's been a card-carrying fan for about 40 years.
Richard Smith. I might have known.
You know him, Tim?
Of him? Out on Gallifrey Base, where I did my first tour, he popped up from time to time. Have you ever run across any of these old-timers?
Oh, not from the dark times.
They think they're a law unto themselves. They don't like us either.
Why?
Well, these old-time fans like Richard were some of the first to go out into deep fandom. For a time they had the place to themselves, going to conventions and comic marts, writing the fanzines, stamping each other's addressed envelopes. They're a wild breed, Paul, and they learned to live without a concept of canon.
And then the internet came along and anyone could be a fan, right?
Yes, even these two.
Oi, I've been a fan forever. How come we don't get proper parts in this sketch?
Doesn't bother me. Gives us more time to chat about the James Webb Space Telescope.
And with me to demonstrate that they know their R's from their elbows, we have Paul.
Hello?
Yeah, hi. And special guest Tim.
Ah!
And also joining us, we have science and astronomy writer Giles.
Is it ham night yet?
And we have graphic designer and Dalek expert Gav.
Happy New Year!
Hooray.
Hey.
Curse of the Black Spot, written by Stephen Thompson and directed by Jeremy Webb.
Well, look, at the time, I was quietly pleased with, especially, well, the first half, superficially, because it came after some very complicated Moffating.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
true.
You know, you had Day of the Moon, and you had the Season 5 Tardis Wildisy stuff. And I loved the idea of a pirate ship and piratey stuff, and the want to cash in on Pirates of the Caribbean, not least with the episode title. And I thought that, oh gosh, this is a good move. But ultimately, you don't get Jack Sparrow, and you don't get Geoffrey Rush. You certainly don't get Robert Newton. And earlier I looked up on pirates.com the list of people least suitable to play King of the Pirates. Right. And the only name on the list was Hugh Bonneville.
That bloke out of Downton Abbey. Make sure.
The bloke off
costs.
2012, yeah.
And yeah, he's just the least piratey-wiratey bloke since Moses, isn't he? And the only piratey-wiratey bloke in the thing was the guy out of Press Gang. And he only had about 3 lines.
Was he the guy who disappeared halfway through?
Yeah.
Do we think that Hugh Bonneville is playing it as written? Because that would then shift the blame somewhere else, and we could say, should the King of the Pirates have been written this way?
A decent chunk of his story seems to be leaning towards the idea that he's a decent chap with a wife and family who's accidentally turned to piracy, which is undermined by his scurrilous friend saying, "I've seen him kill 1,000 innocent people dead."
Which is never followed up on.
He hasn't, though, has he? He's
Go
given
to
him a
Ask
cuddle and said
Jeeves
sorry.
and look up Henry Avery or Henry Every, and tell me whether he's a nice guy. And surely, if I can do that, then
Does he look like a malodorous knave?
Yeah, but I mean, let's think about it. I mean, essentially, anyone who's in the Royal Navy at that point is going to be probably a pretty scurrilous character anyway, because they're all at various degrees of piracy. It just depends whether it's state sponsored or not. So to suggest that there's a real change of, I mean, yes, there is. Go on.
You've thrown it in there as a gag, but that would have been a much more interesting story if they'd actually written something that explored the... Well, I mean, even the later Pirates of the Caribbean films went down that route, didn't they? With Tom Holland.
Yes.
Not Tom Holland, Tom Hollander. My mistake.
Have you seen Taboo? Taboo is brilliant. I highly recommend it. And that is all about legalised piracy. But anyway, yes, carry on.
Yeah, so I guess in that sense, this story of the deeply honourable guy who works for the Royal Navy suddenly turning into the sort of terrible, nasty piratey. It's a bit like in Blackadder when Melcher is talking about British and German spies, isn't it? And one of them are jolly decent chaps on our side, and the others are terribly evil, spineless, cowardly chaps.
Fighting their filthy Hun war.
Yeah.
One of our number made an amazing observation in an off-air moment about the backwards construction of Eve of the Daleks. Tim pointed out that it suggested that the format of that episode worked backwards from this episode is going to culminate with a fireworks display. How do we get there?
Yeah.
And I think that Curse the Black Spot suffers horribly from the same tail wagging the dog. I mean, this is, how can we have a sea siren but that turns out science fiction-y, and it becomes more kind of mangled as it goes to sort of bash this idea into this hole that it's come out of, and so that you can see the brainstorming session of it's an alien ship, so the ship's full of aliens, but it's got this medical hologram. And the medical hologram's going to look like a siren that haunts the pirates. And somebody says, well, she's going to look like an alien, and they're like, oh, for Christ. So we'll say that she's got protein circuitry so she can look like human. Fine, exactly. We'll go with that. And then it's like, well, don't sirens sing? Oh, hang on. Singing could be an anaesthetic. She's a doctor singing anaesthetic. We'll go with that. What's she doing? She's delivering an anaesthetic. Of course she is. Of course she is. From a medical point of view, it really struggles to stand in any kind of logical way. The idea that there's this sort of all-powerful medical robot creature woman singing stuff that will basically go after you, anaesthetize you, and strap you down if you get a pinprick. She doesn't have any ability to judge the severity of injury.
Stub your toe.
She will sniff a droplet of blood, and you are off that battlefield into her medical situation, plugged in. At which point, apparently, you can't be disconnected. You are knackered at that point. If you get a paper cut, you are in her hospital until the end of time.
And she doesn't know how to treat you. Yeah.
Bit of a design.
She doesn't know how to treat you. She can't interact with you. So if she comes up to you and you say, "No, I'm fine," that doesn't work. But at some point, the doctor goes, "Oh, show her your wedding ring. Sign the documents."
I thought that was where you were going.
Love conquers all.
Suddenly,
Show your James Corden power
She'll
of love.
understand a wedding ring.
She's intelligent. She'll understand. You can reason with her. Explain to her you're his wife. Show her the wedding ring. Sign the documents. It's like you can't even tell her to leave you alone because you're fine. You've just got a splinter. But no, you're done for. And then they put a thing in your neck and a thing in your chest, and you're stuck to this bench, and you're done. That's you out of active service.
Did anyone else notice Rory's disappearing tracheotomy?
No, he
He's
didn't.
lying on the gurney with this
right.
tube in his throat. But they pick him up and get him into the TARDIS, and his neck's perfectly fine.
Tim.
Gav.
Is gurney a reference to the smugglers as well?
Very good. But that poor kid has to sit there with this tube hanging out of his throat.
So why does he end up with it at the end? Why is he the only one that's... But there's no explanation for all the other pirates. Right, okay. All the other pirates get their things out of their necks, apparently.
Oh, I see. Yeah, he's got a thing in his neck, and all the other pirates are fine. Yeah, no, good.
For that
No, they don't. The
scene.
kid is sat there in the co-pilot's seat.
Yeah,
down,
except for him.
perfectly au fait, navigating amongst the stars, with this hairdryer stuck out of his throat. But when they whip Rory off the hospital bed, the gurney, and get him into the TARDIS, his neck's perfectly fine.
The other problem I have with that is that, and I don't normally pick up on science fiction details, but it's down to Amy to use her bare hands and brute force to bring him back to life.
Yeah.
But they've taken him into the TARDIS, the most advanced spacecraft known to man. It is a problem I have with the
it's only a
inconsistent
Type 40.
application of made-up technology in science fiction, you know? It was a problem.
But not only that,
the empty child
they've already removed Rory from the second most sophisticated medical system that they've recently come across, which apparently will do everything except fix you.
Yeah, and it's just not going to work. That's the other problem. I mean, whatever she's doing there, it's not going to bring him out.
He's got a lung full of water,
Yes.
lying on his back having a conversation.
Yes. Exactly.
But apparently something is holding back death, and he's gargling away having a chat. And he says, "I'll tell you how to save me."
Does the water immediately?
Which
Is
he
he in a vert? Is it Schrodinger's? I mean, does the water immediately come back as soon as you disconnect him? It's like he's in this... Anyway, I don't really care about that. It's just the fact that the Doctor stands there in his TARDIS,
Yes.
seemingly unable to think of anything he might have to hand that could help.
Yeah.
But because they've
like a touch with regeneration.
because they've
energy,
decided
which is-
it has to end with the power of love
Yes.
conquers all, is the most powerful healing force in the universe, and they work backwards from there. But they don't even. But
You don't need to take it to as
if
far
that's
as
what, if you want to do that, then don't have it end in the TARDIS, or even on, have it end somewhere where you've explicitly made clear there is no advanced technology.
Yeah.
It lost all. I mean, I was faltering at that point anyway, but at the point where I thought, oh, it's going to do another fake out death, and I've just got to sit here for the next 3 minutes while they pretend
Yes,
that
exactly,
he dies. And then you just wait for him to come back to life.
Yes, it doesn't
and
work
the
on
music
any level, does it?
swells and everyone cries. And I think, what are you doing? Like, no one was fooled or cared.
Yeah. It really is just the law of diminishing returns. It's just...
Aliens of London, written by Russell T Davies and directed by Keith Boak. So,
Nice man,
Yeah.
Keith.
well, look, here's the thing. In 2005, I nursed this fond thought that perhaps I could encourage Mrs. Smith to watch the new series of Doctor Who with me. I mean, it was undoubtedly populist. It was a Saturday evening kind of thing. We often sit down in front of the television together to watch drama series. This kind of felt like this might be the time. I might perhaps engage you in my abiding fandom. And it was looking, possibly promising. And then we sat down together to watch Aliens of London. And unfortunately, the combination of farting aliens and what I might describe as kind of CBBC sort of acting at various stages in the programme, it broke the spell. She never watched it since. I mean, she was never that enthusiastic, it has to be said, but it definitely finished her off in terms of the new series. So, and it didn't really matter that next week or the week after the next was Dalek, because she wasn't going to be sitting down and watching it. So, I mean,
So you have very fond memories of it.
It's got that. It does have that baggage. Nonetheless, saying all that, when I watched it for the second time today, it was better than I remembered.
Right. You didn't get pangs, sort of shivers down your spine and sort of like pains in your chest of the memories of what could have been.
Well, look, I'm a geek. I mean, I've watched Doctor Who for very nearly 50 years now. And I never really imagined that it was going to be a thing that anybody else would watch. I mean, that's not true. When I was a boy, of course, all the other boys and some of the girls watched Doctor Who. But, you know, since about 1980, it's not been remotely cool. And so, even though it did become quite cool for a section of the populace in the mid to late 2000s, the Smith household was not one of those places.
Well, it was just nice to revisit. It's nice for these to be historical documents now. I've mentioned this in other things I've done. When Emily Cook did the Rose tweet along, we had a friend staying with us, a disabled friend of ours, who decided to hole up with us during lockdown, because otherwise she'd have been on her own. Yeah. And she had never seen Doctor Who before. And I did the tweet along for Rose, and she was in watching it. And I said, so you've never seen Doctor Who before? What did you think of that? And she said, well, it was different. And I said, different to what? And she said, everything. And I thought that's a great description of Doctor Who. And she wanted to watch some more. So I picked a few, Russell ones that I hadn't seen for ages, and worked through the first couple of seasons while she was still with us. And suddenly looking back at these episodes I haven't seen for a while that I saw so many times when they first came out. But I did skip Aliens in London World War III on that occasion. It's really interesting now that we can look back and see them through the lens of what has come since, but also their place in the history of the show, but with that knowledge and that sort of race memory that we have of when they were new and it was all a bit frightening, and was Doctor Who going to be successful, and oh my god it was, and it was in this way and that way, and the sheer joy of all those different elements means that I know that I'll be able to watch this stuff time and time again for years to come, and that fills me with great joy. And I also cannot wait until we start being able to properly dig into the history.
Yes.
In a way that we've only sort of much more recently been able to do with the classic series, when people's livelihoods don't depend on things, and when people are just a bit looser-tongued or circumspect or whatever. And I don't mean in terms of gossip now. I just mean in terms of going, actually, that didn't work, or actually we could have done that a bit differently, or actually he hated him, or whatever. Yeah. But as I say, the gossip side is immaterial, really. I know we all sort of that adds an extra bit of frisson to it, but just in terms of what could have been, what they felt at the time, because we don't really know what they felt at the time, because much of what we've got is through Doctor Who Confidential, which would have been stupid if they'd gone, well, we didn't think that bit worked. You know what I mean? It's that would be mad. Yeah. And it was great to have Doctor Who Confidential and to show how the special effects were done, and also to get carried away in the enthusiasm. So I'm not dissing Doctor Who Confidential. It did what it was supposed to do. But there are whole layers of archaeology to be done. And I am thrilled, as a boring old fart whose entire life centres around Doctor Who, that there's so much of that to uncover. And I cannot wait. And watching this story again, well, I've not really... that I thought of as a sort of flawed early entry. It's admirable the amount that they do get right, and it's great fun to watch. And some things that bothered me at the time don't really... Because history tells us we don't need to be bothered by them. So then you can just go, oh, well, that's an interesting curio, rather than the series is going to be destroyed. Yes. So I found it a really... I watched it in order to do this, and was like, oh, I better do it then. And came out the other end going, oh, I really enjoyed watching that. It's great.
What a lovely note to end on.
I often wonder how tempted, if there was a notion of being tempted to call it the Celestial Intervention Agency and run with that whole... Because there's an awful lot of consternation amongst Doctor Who fans about the Doctor working for Division. But, you got we've talked about it before, but the line in The Two Doctors where the Doctor, Patrick Troughton, Second Doctor, says, I do jobs for the Time Lords and it's the price I pay for my freedom. It's not a huge extension of that. It's just thrown some amnesia in and rejig the timeline a bit. But, it's the Timeless Child and the pre-Hartnell Doctors that tests people. But they almost feel like... either one of those concepts should have been fully explored, but throwing them both in at once kind of... I think people might have been more invested in the Doctor having a sort of secret past life to do with Time Lord missions, without having to also deal with the idea that the history of 1960s Doctor Who doesn't start when you thought it started and all of that, because that kind of muddied people's objections, I suppose, because it was sort of it was two lots of rewriting Doctor Who history thrown at people all in one go, and I think either would have been an interesting and very strong thing to explore on its own.
It's why I always think it's a shame with I forgot which episode it is now, but where we had that moment where we could have seen Joe Martin in action as the Doctor kind of thing, but then we get Jodie in a different coat, and I'm just yeah, and it really bugged me, that, because it was that moment when we could have gone, oh, I see how this all ties in together now. Yes. But we've just got a reenactment of it, and you don't get the gravitas of the situation of like how Joe's Doctor would have dealt with it, and whether or not, you know, she's a Doctor that's part of the division, and that's a pre-Hartnell Doctor, I don't know, or it's a parallel Doctor, you know, whatever. You know, you could have dropped some really lovely hints to sort of like keep the imagination going, because you never really want to sort of answer all the questions, because otherwise, you know, what's the point in calling the show Doctor Who kind of thing. But, you know, it would have just given enough explanation for the whole timeless child thing, because I still don't really grasp the concept of it either. Yeah, it's a shame. And, you know, the whole division thing as well, like turning Jodie into a weeping angel because they want to call her back, I think it's such a great concept that they're using the Doctor in that way still now. But then it just never comes to anything, and it's always really disappointing. And that's when I look back at certain episodes, like Fugitive of the Jadoon and stuff, because I'm like, we've got such a great actress that's playing this amazing part, and she hasn't been given her time to shine. And I really hope at some point, maybe even if Big Finish do it at some stage, to really establish her character, because there's so much potential that we just haven't seen. But, you know, there's so much going on with Jodie's regeneration coming up and all that. It's so hard to bundle it all together. So, yeah, I don't know, because obviously I don't know with the last 2 episodes that we've got left with Jodie, whether or not we'll get any more Joe Martin stuff. I don't know, but yeah, we'll just wait and see. But yeah.
I mean, I think she's, you know, her character is reminiscent for me of Michael Jaston. You know, and he's revealed as being between the 2 incarnations. You think, oh, they're going to do something with that, and then that's the last you ever hear of it.
You have Joe Martin look at the camera like, like kind of thing. Like.
Yeah, it's a great idea, but where's it going? I mean, for me, the third thing in your after your 2 things, Gav. You know, so I can swallow, I think, the Doctor being tied up with the Time Lords, and indeed that there's pre-Hartnell Doctors. I'd sooner there weren't, but I could live with that. But it's the Doctor being special that kind of kills it for me in the end. That because, you know, that kind of takes away a bit from the fact that he or she has decided to make something of themselves, rather than again this predestination thing, I suppose.
That's it. It's the Doctor is supposed to be a kind of anti-establishment, destabilizing little person who enters these situations and with the skill and knowledge and bravery and nothing else and no weapons, that they can overcome great odds. And as you say, we now discover that they're, you know, the founder of Time Lord Society, and the reason that the most powerful race in the galaxy has its most powerful physiological asset, and the origin of all regeneration energy and all of this stuff. And it's like discovering your main character's Jesus when you just thought they were Columbo. There is a scene where Claire comes in, turns and faces a mirror, and she walks towards the mirror, puts her head down. I think is there a basin there?
Yes,
And then,
that's when she
and then as
the
she
wings.
lifts,
The wings,
the camera pushes in, and she grows her wings. Right. In that shot, the camera is directly facing the mirror, and she walks into shot between the camera and the mirror, and there is no camera in the reflection of the mirror, which there would be because the camera is behind her. Right? Does that make sense? Watch that scene again, the way it's staged, there is a wall with a mirror, but the mirror is an aperture. It's a window. So the real actor of Claire walks in behind the aperture. A body double walks in front. So Claire is playing her reflection only. Sorry, I don't know the actual actor's name. And so very carefully in sync, the body double and the real Claire put their heads down. They're not quite perfectly in sync, but it's close enough that you don't notice if you're just watching it once. And then the body double steps away, and then the camera just shoots her as she stands up, and then VFX puts the wings in. But it's very beautifully done, and it's very clever.
So it's 2013, we're in the run-up to the 50th anniversary. Stephen Moffat's promised more Doctor Who than ever before, although nobody can ever find that quote. Our lives are about to be overtaken by the Omnirumour, and we're just into the second half of the split Series 7. Gary, I think you had some further musings on that thought.
Yeah, well, I mean, sort of my fault you're watching this. When we discussed what we might do, I pointed out that I'd never seen this story.
Yeah.
And this was not out of any kind of moodiness on my point. It's clear I was not kind of like off the show in some way, because looking at my phone, the best way to find out how you're spending any time now is to look through your camera phone pictures for any day of the last 15 years. And I can see I was having a nice afternoon out with friends. I obviously missed it, and then I think I got back, and by that point there'd been a bad response to it, so I didn't rush to catch up. And then it was just rolled over with the next episode. But I'd just been on set for Adventure in Space and Time for the magazine, so my fan gene was buzzing. I think 2 days after Akaten was on, I was walking to work, crossing Trafalgar Square, to discover them lowering the TARDIS on a crane for the opening scenes of the anniversary special. And everyone was sort of stood around. So it was all sort of going on. And of course, the Omnirumour was in full flight. Part of that, I think, really spread through a conversation that me and Tom Spilsby had in a Pizza Express, and there was literally someone at the table behind us leaning further and further back, and it was all on Outpost Gallifrey the next day. It was literally the conversation where I went, "Sorry, what, you mean they found everything?" So it was all go. I was up for it, but it just kind of it passed me by, and it continued to do. And then I kind of liked the idea that I had an episode still to watch, and it sort of kept me warm. And but I've spoiled that for this. I've spoiled that for you.
Thank you.
So it means that this week I've managed to watch a brand new episode of Doctor Who that I largely enjoyed. So that's that's something for Easter week.
Excellent.
I always have this thing with Doctor Who. If you're a lifetime fan, it's like anything that you love. It's like a rope back through your life. Everything else, you have no influence in the things that change around you. Your friends coming and going, deaths of loved ones, the world itself. But this you've got this rope that goes back, and it's a rope that's like, you sort of tap in like a rock climber. You put in it hangs there, but every now and again you need a fastening point for it. And when you're young, you've got all these great stories or things that you love, and they're all these hard points where your rope is attached. But if a few years pass and you don't feel you get a point to attach it in, if it doesn't give you a good like moment, you can like when Tom appears in the museum, and you're like, oh my god, and you're hammering in. That's me. I'm a fan again now. And then you start paying out the rope again, waiting for the next one. This time, and the current era, I kind of feel, whenever everyone feels a bit negative about it, they're just a bit lost. They're just like, give me something to believe in. Give me something to hang on to. So you're not down on it. It's fine. It's all fine. It's all fine, but you just want something.
Yeah.
It's nice to see it to have a helicopter.
Yeah,
Yes,
the helicopter stunts are awesome. Like, I think, like, 60s Doctor Who as well. Like, they really went all out with their helicopter stunts.
Well, Barry, of course, directed. Yeah,
Oh,
Barry
yes.
directed Enemy
Yeah.
of the World.
Yes.
So he was fond of a chopper. For now.
Scurrilous rumour there.
The happily married man.